In the city of Suzhou, where canals thread between silk merchants and scholars' gardens, an art was born that China would call the mother of all opera. More than 600 years ago, a musician named Wei Liangfu shut himself in his house and barely emerged for 10 years. His neighbors could hear him through the walls. The same phrases, endlessly repeated, endlessly refined, until the sound that emerged was unlike anything heard before in Chinese music. He called it the water-polished melody, like jade ground smoothed by river water, like a voice heard from another century. The art that Wei Liangfu perfected was Kunqu, named for Kunshan, the small city where it was born. It was not simply music. It was the meeting of 6 arts: poetry, music, painting, calligraphy, dance, and drama, brought together on a single stage in a single performer's body. When the first complete Kunqu opera was performed for the scholars and merchants of Suzhou in 1559, accounts say the audience fell silent in a way they never had before. They were hearing something they had not known was possible. In 1598, a poet-scholar named Tang, Xianzu, wrote the work that would define Kunqu forever. He and William Shakespeare died in the same year, 1616. Both men were obsessed with dreams, with the impossible thinness of the boundary between imagination and reality. Tang Xianzu wrote, "The world within the dream, who knows if it is less real than the world without?" His play, The Peony Pavilion, tells the story of Du Linyang, a young woman kept in seclusion, her life governed entirely by propriety, who one spring day was allowed to walk in the garden. And everything changed. Du Linyang stepped into the garden and saw peonies in bloom, willows trailing in the breeze, bees carrying gold from flower to flower, a world alive with color and desire. And she felt, with devastating clarity, that she had never truly lived. She fell asleep under the peony tree. In the dream, a young scholar found her there and loved her. When she woke, he was gone. She painted her own portrait, a self-portrait to be found after her death, a face left in the world as evidence that she once existed and was beautiful. She hid the portrait under a stone in the garden. Then she died, of the dream, of the distance between what she had glimpsed and what her life was. 3 years after Du Linyang's death, a real young scholar named Lu Mengmei came to shelter in the same garden. He found the portrait under the stone. He fell in love with the image of the dead woman, her face painted by her own hand before she died. The ghost of Du Linyang appeared to him. They loved each other across the boundary between the living and the dead. He opened her tomb. She returned to life. Tang Xianzu wrote, "The feelings that arise from dreams, why should they be any less real than waking life? The love between Du Linyang and Lu Mengmei is the truest love in the world." To watch Kunqu is to watch the human body become poetry. The performer's long white silk sleeves, called water sleeves, are instruments of emotion as precise as any musical note. A trembling sleeve means grief. Sleeves thrown upward mean sudden joy. Sleeves covering the face mean modesty or shame. Every step is measured. Every turn of the head is meaningful. The body moves so slowly, so deliberately, that a walk across the stage can take minutes. And in that slowness, every breath the performer takes is visible, and the audience holds its own. The bamboo flute breathes with them. The defining sound of Kunqu is the bamboo flute, longer and lower than the common flute, its tone described in Chinese as distant and secluded, like something heard from another room or another century. When the flautist plays the opening notes of a performance, audiences describe it as feeling that time has changed, that the ordinary world has receded and something older and more beautiful has arrived. This is what Kunqu asks of its audience, not to watch a story, but to enter a different quality of time. to breathe differently, to listen with the whole body. For 200 years, from the late Ming Dynasty through the height of the Qing, Kunqu was the art of Chinese civilization at its most refined. Wealthy families maintained private Kunqu troops, performers trained from childhood, housed and fed as part of the household. A garden party in Suzhou without Kunqu was unthinkable. The imperial court in Beijing devoted entire weeks to continuous performances. Emperor Qianlong, one of the most culturally ambitious rulers in Chinese history, was so devoted to Kunqu that performances at his court could last 7 days without pause. The art wore the city's finest silk on its back. It breathed the perfume of the great scholars' gardens. By the middle of the 20th century, Kunqu had almost ceased to exist. The fall of the empire removed its greatest patrons. War, poverty, and upheaval shattered the institutions that had sustained it for centuries. A new opera form, Peking opera, bolder and faster, had already taken the popular stage 150 years before. And then came the years of great upheaval, when Kunqu was banned as old superstition, theaters were closed, and the chain of transmission between master and student, the only way this art had ever survived, was broken. When the silence finally ended, scholars found fewer than 100 trained Kunqu artists remaining in all of China. In 1956, a single production changed everything. A Kunqu drama called The 15 Strings of Cash was staged in Zhejiang and then brought to Beijing. Premier Zhou Enlai watched it and declared, "One play saved a whole opera form." It toured nationally. It reminded China that this art, old, slow, impossibly refined, was still alive. A handful of aging masters still carried the full tradition in their bodies. The urgent work now was to find young people willing to learn and to make the transfer before time ran out. In 1999, a director staged the first complete performance of the Peony Pavilion in modern times. All 55 acts, performed over multiple evenings at Lincoln Center in New York and at festivals across Europe. Western audiences who had never heard of Kunqu wept. They did not understand the words. They did not need to. The water sleeves, the bamboo flute, the impossibly slow steps, the young woman who died in a garden and returned for love. These spoke in a language older than any translation. UNESCO recognized Kunqu as a masterpiece of human heritage in 2001, one of the first art forms in the world to receive this honor. Du Linyang painted her own portrait and hid it under a stone. She did this because she knew she was going to die, and she wanted to leave evidence, not of her name, not of her family, not of her rank, but of her face. The face of a woman who had once looked at a garden in spring and felt everything. 400 years later, her story is still being told, still sung, still danced in water sleeves and bamboo flute. Every performance is a hand reaching back across centuries to lift that portrait from under the stone and say, "She was here. She saw the peonies. She loved. She was real." Tang Xianzu wrote that Du Linyang died of a dream. But Kunqu itself has refused to die. Through the fall of dynasties, through wars and bans and silence, through a century that seemed determined to extinguish everything old and beautiful, it survived. In the hands of aging masters who refused to stop teaching. In the bodies of young performers who chose the slowest, most demanding, most refined art their civilization had ever produced. In gardens where the bamboo flute still begins the evening and the water sleeves still tremble with grief and joy, and a young woman in pale silk still walks out into the spring garden and sees the peonies and feels everything for the very first time.